Here's a scenario I've seen play out several times over the last couple of years. An older DPP player comes back after a few years away and decides to play their favorite metagame again. They expect to see some changes, of course. It's been a while since they last played, but they're mostly expecting different movesets on Heatran, for example. They were not expecting to see Clefable as one of the best Pokemon around. Back in the days of DPP as a current gen, Blissey was everywhere, and Clefable was UU. But nowadays, if tiering hadn't gone static when the generation ended and we still tiered based on current DPP usage, Clefable would be resoundingly OU. So in this video, we are going to go over what Clefable does, why it has largely eclipsed Blissey, and some history to see how we got here. First off, I want to mention that Clefable is not 100% better than Blissey, and some teams really do appreciate Blissey's huge special bulk, because if there's one thing Clefable can't do, it's stand up to monstrous special threats like Rain Dance Kingdra and Specs Heatran. And for some bulky offense teams, then that's why they much prefer Blissey's greater walling ability, which facilitates the frailty of the other members to a greater extent, since they don't have to panic every time they see a Specs Kingdra. They know that Blissey will wall it, whereas Clefable would have just crumpled. So here's an example. This very popular Jirachi team that's been seen a lot and had a lot of tournament success, it uses Blissey, and it's succeeded in the heart of the Clefable era. So it goes to show that Blissey is still extremely, extremely good. It's just harder to fit on your average team, and we're going to go over why that is now. So, the reason Clefable is so good is Magic Guard, which is kind of a, well, duh. Magic Guard is its entire selling point, but is Magic Guard really worth the much lower bulk? Turns out it's not just the Magic Guard that Clefable has. Another incredible move is Knockoff, but we'll get there. So Clefable is functionally bulky enough to handle special attackers like Zapdos and whatnot, that it can pretty much perform Blissey's duties without much trouble and support its team. And Magic Guard is a big deal because since Blissey is often so unbreakable on the special side, then people will use anti-Blissey measures in the form of passive damage. So Sandstorm just automatically makes Blissey more vulnerable to soft boiling. Taking Stealth Rock on the switch, you throw a Heatran Fire Blast out with rocks and sand up, suddenly Blissey is soft boiling and you get a free switch. Whereas Clefable still has to soft boil in the face of something like Heatran, but in terms of weaker water moves, then it very often can go several turns without having to heal, which makes it a lot more easy to harass the other team as they switch in. A lot less free switches, and harder to wear down, which of course you want it out of the way, and makes it even more irritating when it's so effective at putting you on a timer, because you will not retain your leftovers when you switch into Clefable, because it has knockoff. So it really does speak to the longevity aspect of Pokemon, and Toxic Spikes, of course, are another huge one, which just completely cripple Blissey and make it vulnerable to getting overwhelmed by Suicune and Jirachi that it shouldn't really be having trouble with. So Magic Guard is just that big a deal, and Knockoff makes it even better, because suddenly it's not caring about the million layers of spikes it's dealing with on its side of the field, and Sandstorm, meanwhile, you are. And it's still quite bulky enough. The EV spread varies. You can run Max Spadef because it's still really bulky. It doesn't mind. It's not 2 KO by Heatran Fire Blast, not even close. And it can shrug off even things like Specs Kingdra fairly decently. It switches into Specs Latios and eats 2 Draco Meteors, which is incredibly impressive for a non-resist, a non-Blissey non-resist. Of course, some people like more defense. 72 is the most common benchmark because it avoids Scarf Flygon Outrage 2 KOing. So in the last slot, it has a million options, and all of them are really good. Stealth Rock is super obvious because it dominates Starmie, absolutely dominates Starmie, and it threatens knockoff on it, and it keeps up those rocks really easily. So it makes an incredibly reliable Stealth Rocker, and that's always a good thing. And if you want rocks somewhere else, then you still have a ton of other options. Thunder Wave, always good. Cripple Jirachi, cripple pretty much everything. This reminds me that another amazing trait of Magic Guard is that in DPP only, you cannot get fully paralyzed when using Magic Guard. And I think that's incredibly valuable. So things like Zapdos Thunderbolt paralyzing you, you don't care. So a lot of people complain about Magic Guard Clef, saying it's too strong because it ignores hazards and even that it ignores full paralysis. And I just can't get behind that mentality at all, because years ago people were complaining, oh, hazards are too strong, paralysis is too strong. And then here comes this Pokemon that helps with both of those, and people weren't such fans of it. So I personally don't agree. But more on that later. Anyway, so Thunder Wave and Stealth Rock are the two most obvious ones, but Clefable has a ton of incredible options. Ice Beam turns it into a very reliable Gliscor counter for defense. Make sure you switch to Calm Nature if you're running Ice Beam, but if you're not running a special attack like you usually aren't, you run Careful, just because Knockoff will do a little more to subbing Ghosts, especially Gengar. Other options, Aromatherapy doesn't really get used. It could, but you usually won't. Counter, very viable. Also doesn't get used, but I think it's definitely better than Aromatherapy. Encore, incredibly annoying, because the metagame has shifted to the point where Clefable often war each other, because nothing else can switch in without sustaining such heavy damage. And Encore gets you a big leg up on other Clefable, because you no longer get into that knock, toss, soft-boiled routine. And suddenly you can go more on the offensive, so very good move if you can afford it. And Healing Wish can probably be used, I probably wouldn't though, on most teams. And the last real option I really, really love is Wish. Oh, there are two more. Wish, which can be used with soft-boiled, or you can do what I really like to do and run Protect on soft-boiled, but that's more because soft-boiled... Protect is already good even with soft-boiled. It does things like prevent CB Tar from trapping with ease, and just generally gains leftovers. Clefable, with its lower bulk than Blissey, tends to really love every bit of leftovers recovery it can squeeze out, and Protect is just goes a long, long way in helping it do that, as well as just getting it out of range for things like Heatran Fire Blast, that it's kind of on the cusp of, if not kept at full health. But that's the whole thing. With Magic Guard, it is incredibly easy to keep it at full health. Whereas with Blissey, it's so bulky that it doesn't really matter if it dips to 50. It's still going to switch in and destroy your offensive Suicune. But with Clefable, it's so often at full health because you can't really chip it with passive damage. You have to directly attack it. So it is incredibly difficult to switch into this without a Breloom, because everything else is going to lose its leftovers, besides Sticky Hold Gastrodon, but that's incredibly niche. And Breloom, of course, does not love Seismic Toss, especially with a lot of hazards up, so the name of the game really has become Clefable with hazards outlasts the opponent. I'm not saying Clefable is invincible, by the way. You can definitely make a traditional Clefable stall's life very miserable the same way you would for other stall, just with brute force, because it is weak to fighting types. But you have to be very careful to not get overwhelmed by the support Clefable has and entry hazards. Because it is you can't, with Blissey, then you would be annoyed by entry hazards, but it would also be annoyed by entry hazards. Whereas with Clefable, it's a one-way street. So that is what support Clefable does, and it's many, many options. And the other set is Calm Mind. Now, in recent times, people have been calling for a ban on this or Dugtrio, and I personally don't agree with that at all. But it is very, very good. This was actually the original Clefable set in DPP when people thought about using Clefable in OU because of Magic Guard. And of course, back then it was considered a gimmick. Now it's considered for Ubers. I don't think it's going to happen, but regardless, This was the original set because stall teams used to get away with just being purely entry hazard reliant. I mean, they wanted to cover some things that didn't mind passive damage, Sandstorm, as much, such as Gliscor being the biggest one, but this was a way to prey on that. And it's a great sweeper with max defense, which I should mention, this Clefable set can also run more defense, but generally it's used to tank special hits, so you want to maintain some semblance of that. Matter of fact, one of Clefable's initial appeals was the fact that it switched into Life Orb Starmie without being 2-hit KO'd, so it could act like a Blissey very, very much. So with Bold, you lose that, but you become incredibly tanky against most Earthquakes and even things like a lot of Outrages. The calcs are pretty impressive. As, for example, we can look to CB Tyranitar and Calm Mind, and Superpower is going to KO, but since Superpower is low, it's more look at how little that Stone Edge does. If you know it doesn't have Superpower, you can just soft boil on it so you don't get pursued. Crunch is not very much, so... oh, that's not even at full health for some reason. Yeah, it's not even guaranteed a 2 KO with a banded Crunch. That's incredible. Just as an illustration of how bulky it can be. Other things like Gliscor, Earthquake get shrugged off incredibly easily. Even things like Gyarados. This Clefable often acts as a Gyarados check because +1 Waterfall, I just put Choice Band there for convenience, is very low chance to 2-hit KO, and you're not wearing it down, so it's the same idea, except instead of going in a more support role, you now trade the ability to act as a great special sponge that gets in there and fights dirty and weakens the opposing team with the ability to really sweep, really clamp down on the opponent, especially with the greater coverage that lets you check a wider variety of things like Dragonite and Gyarados. So there are variations to these sets, but this is going to be a long enough video as is. So yeah, that's the same idea with this set. You just go more for the sweep and you switch into different things. So that is what the Clefables do. And now we are, to further understand just what they do, then we are going to go through the history of Clefable's rise, which I have been a first-party witness to and have contributed to. Sorry. But yeah, it's amazing to think that Clefable was UU when DPP ended, and if we had kept up our usage-based tiering, then it would be resoundingly OU now. It wouldn't even be close. Blissey would not be UU or anywhere near it. It still gets used, but Clefable, well, we'll see the exact usage later. So now, to our history thing. The first instance of Clefable being mentioned that I remember was in the fall of 2010 when I was talking with Heist /Babidi1998, and he is a recurring character in this story. And we were discussing methods to defeat KG stall, or Kevin Garrett stall, which you can look up if you'd like. That was not exclusively a KG team, it was just the standard stall team, and the standard stall teams of the day all looked like that. August, Taylor, everyone who ran stall, Earthworm. So everyone who ran stall ran something very similar. So we were talking, anti-stall measures, and he was like, if I really wanted to just beat stall, I'd run Calm Mind Clefable. So that was that, and I think he was one of the few people who really knew about Clefable's potential. Earthworm and Panamaxis, I believe, were the others. But more to that, the first time I saw Clefable in action was in the summer of 2012 when I played Earthworm for a Victory Road tournament, and he was running a Clefable stall team. It was also a stall team without spikes, which, again, opened my eyes. But I think this was one of the teams that they were talking about. It also featured other stuff like a Spadef Gliscor, which also blew my mind. It was a very unique stall team, but the idea was basically the same. Clefable doesn't take passive damage, and it's going to wear down others. He wasn't even using knockoff. This hadn't really been discovered yet. But, see, look at that. Switched into a Tyranitar's Crunch with, nothing. It was easy. So, Yeah, Clefable, this was used then, and Heist was using it. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. So Heist was using this team around then too, and I think it had been around before that, but this was just a very early instance of Clefable doing what we now know it to do so well. And as if you're reading this log carefully, I'll leave all the links I use in this video in the description. Then that's supposed to be a Celebi, that messed up sprite. Then you'll see that the Clefable was incredibly... I mean, even against an offensive team like this, then Clefable managed to be annoying. So then this was still a very niche pick. I mean, Earthworm used to use a lot of crazy stuff like Pursuit Toxicroak, and he made it work because he just knew it so well. But on a larger metagame scale, not really existing. So then we go to the very early stages of 2013 in a DPP tournament in the finals where Panamaxis, another guy who was privy to it, used not only Clefable. Actually, this was support Clefable, so I guess you could argue that the first real big stage Clefable set was not Calm Mind, but support after all. As here, Earthworm's Clef was using, I think it just Seismic Tossed, or I think it even used Protect. He used Toxic because I remember at that time, whenever you saw a random Clefable, or later, then the answer to the question, what set does Clefable run? And the answer was just Blissey set. So Blissey with Toxic was the most standard set. And so you could just slap on whatever Blissey set onto a Clefable and it would work. So, that is why Toxic was used here. Toxic, I don't think would be that good nowadays. I mean, it would cripple Swampert for sure. And given how offensive Swampert has risen, a lot of metagame adaptations have been made for Clefable. It's just the real deal. Even a couple of years ago, people were wondering, hey, when is this Clefable trend going to go away? And it wasn't a trend. It has not been a trend. So the metagame has adapted to it. And it's not like one of those flashes in the pan where as soon as everyone knows what it does, it stops being good. It's better than ever even. So, so the first Clefable instance was support. And now we are going to see not only a Calm Mind Clefable, but a Doug trio on Panazen. So he was using Doug Calm Mind Fable years and years before it was considered to be uber. And it wasn't exactly overwhelming either. But as you can see in this battle too, it shrugs off a strong T-Tar Stone Edge and is threatening the opponent with... and it switches into Will-O-Wisp. Even something like a Will-O-Wisp Rotom or a Toxic Heatran annoys the hell out of Blissey. Substitute Toxic Heatran used to be a great set because it just subbed on Blissey, toxicked it, and then pretty much forced it to switch out and have something else get hit. But Clefable, no, none of that. And that's why that set has pretty much dropped out of existence. So, switches into like a Wisp Rotom all day long too. Really, really resilient Pokemon. And that is why it has risen, because people realized that resilience is such a big deal, and being able to withstand the full brunt of all the passive damage that gets thrown around is just incredible. I have to emphasize again the point of not being forced to heal nearly as easily, and not just because it takes even with Blissey's case, you were going to have to heal more even if you were attacking, because you would still stay at that health that you were at when you took the chip damage. So yeah, you could attack when you were at 88 and 76 and so on, but you were going to have to heal eventually. Whereas Clefable, if you don't directly hit it, then it's just going to keep healing in Sandstorm. Healing in Sandstorm has been a huge deal since Advance, and Clefable perfectly exemplifies just how big that advantage can be. Anyway, so back to the Pana thing, as Clefable pulls off a sweep in early 2013. Then late 2013, I remember in August of this year, then Heist messaged me saying he had a new stall team, and it also had Calm Mind Clefable. And here is the first logged instance of him using that, also against Pana. So we'll skim through this because Clefable games tend to be long, and he was using Blissey alongside it, so he had the walling ability and the resilience of Clefable. It was a really innovative, really important team. And we see here, he was using Max Spdef Calm Mine Clefable because it switched into and destroyed offensive Suicune. So, Max Spdef Calm used to be the standard. Nowadays, it's all about Bold. You still could use it if you wanted to, if it fit your team better, but I think Bold is overall better. Makes Clefable a lot tougher to deal with because it's already annoying enough, and then your physical attacks start doing nothing to it, and it just gets worrisome. So, yeah, so Clefable here. Again, all the links will be in the description for those who who enjoy reading those things, as Clefable wins again and reduces Panic to Tears. So, then, the next instance of it being used. Tsung here, this is the fall of 2014, Smogon Tour semifinals. And Hot and Cold, who built Tsung's team, was familiar with Heist, or was friends with Heist, so he knew how good Clefable was, and he knew what it could do to standard stall teams. So he built a team with it, and it really showed just how threatening it can be. And we're going to skip through this because this is going to take more. But see, look at Clefable's resilience, and it's hard to ward off because, you know, Solon's forced to use his Spdef Scarm to phase it out. Not something too sustainable, and he's going to not enjoy it in the long run. He's got to really pressure with Gliscor that Clefable also switches into pretty nice because it takes Earthquake. I mean, switching into Gliscor is just incredible. So it shrugs off Rotom as well. And as you see, these stall teams very often just have the one Pokemon that can really hurt the Clef, and that is Tyranitar. And it's getting worn down with hazards, and Clef can even shrug off the Pursuit. Whereas if you Pursuit a Blissey with hazards up, then good night. And I gotta say, it's very much to Tsung's credit that he managed, or Solwin's credit, that he managed to play around this incredibly tough Pokemon with his team that was not really prepared for it. And it's actually a team I was spamming at the time because Clefable was not really a thing. It was just that kind of offbeat gimmick you could use sometimes. And props to Hot and Cold for showing everyone that it could really be effective. This team got pretty popular in the seasons of Smogon Tour following this one, although it never really got big stage use again, and the archetype hasn't popped up again because Crobat has also fallen out of favor. But Hot and Cold deserves a lot of credit for that one. And Tsung, of course, is using it really well, but this team is not really ready for the Clef era, and matter of fact, I think I took it from something I was using in the Latias era when Latias Salamence era when Clefable really didn't exist. But yeah, and I think Solwyn only loses eventually because Clefable gets an inevitable Thunderbolt paralysis and slows down the Skarmory, but it was really impressive the way Solwyn played this. So, yeah, this was an example of Clefable just doing Clefable things, and he gets the para and can't do it anymore. Pursuits it again, but at this point it's just too tough. He's got to somehow win it with Pert, and that's not really the point of this video. We're not analyzing games, we're just showing what Clefable does. You know, and Clefable does it again. So the next appearance was in the finals of this very same Smogon Tour, and this was a team I made for Sweepage, and he said he just wanted a very stally team, so I decided, hell yeah, Clefable rules. And barring some of the movesets, this team actually predicted, and the Quagsire, which isn't that popular, but I think it was still, this team actually predicted some really popular stall teams back then. And see, there was an example of Clefable switching into a strong special attack, and whereas Blissey wouldn't have been as immediately phased by the Spadef drop, it also wouldn't have enjoyed the rocks and sand it was forced to take. So, and yes, so Clefable was doing its thing as always in this one. As you see here, it's going to shrug off a Magnezone Explosion, a Choice Band Flygon Outrage, several as it's waiting for the confusion. And now he's going to... well, he had to soft-boiled, and he had a very good chance to win if he didn't get the Seed Flare Spadef drops, which is unfortunate as hell, but it just goes to show, for our overall point, that Clefable was... Clefable kept doing Clefable things and showing how strong it was. Then, after this, we have Clefable's Breakout Tournament, SPL 5, as here we see Badoosh using a very ahead-of-its-time Clefable stall team with Milotic, and... well, I'd say maybe there were some changes in order, like Knockoff, which hadn't been discovered yet, but Stealth Rock Clefable, and he even had Encore on it, which we're going to have to skip through to see. As there, we saw Encore on the sub, so that's not, you don't really see Encore and Stealth Rock these days, but it was very much a thing. So, yeah, we're going to skip through that one, so it's... and then Heist was using his known Clefable team this game against Badass. And he was using... actually, this was still when he was using Calm Mind Clef, as you saw from switching into... oh, no, I'm sorry. It was... that's not a Banded Gyarados. If it was a Banded Gyarados, then Bold Clef would have taken around that damage, but it's Lefty's Gyarados, and he's using Calm Mind Clef with Thunderbolt, so he switched it into it. But Bold Clef takes a lot less from Lefty's Gyarados. It's impressive. So this is another example of it. And matter of fact, later in this SPL, we'll look this up. And here we see the first Clef on Clef game between Fakes and Tamahome. This is Tamahome. And yeah, Fakes was actually just took Badoosh's team and made some moveset changes, whereas Tama was running Magnezone Clefable, which was kind of like the Earthworm team from years before, but Zone Clef I don't think has really taken off. But again, this was really early, the Clef, so... and he was using Knockoff too, so this was the first documented instance of that. So really, what's the word? Prescient stuff. So here we see Calm Mind Clef, again posing a huge threat to Tama's team since he's got the T-Tar, but he doesn't have that much longevity with it, and Clefable dumpsters everything else really nicely. And yeah, so it's just Gliscor and Clefable at it, and Clefable's going to wear down the T-Tar, and there it goes. So, and Clefable is going to win, as we see here. So that was really early, and the game I wanted to bring up next was, I forgot to get this one up, but I believe it was, if I can find it, what year is this from? 2016, so even older. Five years ago. I think this is it. Yeah, it is. Okay, so, and this was the game where Heist took his previous Clefable team and made it Knockoff, and that showed just how irritating it could be without having to go on stall teams. So credit to Tama for that one first, and then Heist really popularized it, and then Heist and myself spammed a lot of Clef after this, because after this breakout tournament that Clef had, then it became more and more used. Like Husk used this Heist team in the following World Cup, and it was just generally accepted as, oh, this isn't an offbeat gimmick. Well, maybe not an offbeat gimmick, but it's definitely got more widespread use. It's worth using often. As here we see the full force of Clefable not caring about toxic spikes and hail slash sand, and knocking off everything in sight, just being incredibly irritating. So Venusaur and Clef together being incredibly annoying. The Venusaur thing kind of died out because guys like Leech Seeders, the Venusaurs, the Abomasnows, the Shamans, they died out too. They also really irritated Blissey. Leech Protect Shaman was famous for messing with Blissey because it didn't care about Toxic or T-Wave thanks to Natural Cure, and it could just stay in on it and keep getting a million health because of Blissey's huge HP stat, and Clefable doesn't have any of that. Those kinds of Toxic Spike, Sub-Heatran, Leech Protect, Shaman teams that used to be popular when the only special target was Blissey, those are gone. They just can't really... I mean, I'm not saying they're bad. You just have to have a very, very direct, solid plan for Clefable, because Clefable is unforgiving as hell. So, here we see Clefable and Gliscor at it again. Just, God, I love Gliscor too. Such an underrated Pokemon for something so good. And, yeah, it was a done deal. But, yeah, Clefable did that. And then Clefable started becoming, a real thing. And then I think it really, hit a new plateau when Shake used this team that I made for him in World Cup of 2017 against X-Ray. And it was just if you've played DPP at all in the last couple of years, you know this team. I like to refer to it as I Crawled, and it makes full use of Clefable, and it just, as you can see in this game, just wearing everything down. And this was a very rough draft. I didn't even have lefties on the T-Tar, but it just goes to show how good Clefable was as Clef. Even something like Sub-Toxic Ruse Zapdos, which could annoy Blissey, none of that with Clefable. So, as you can see here, it even eats a Pursuit, nothing. And it's going to win the hell out of this game, as it just soft-boils on Zapdos and threatens knockoff as well. So, I had some games in between this that weren't as relevant, but like a game I had against Toph. Actually, I should pull that one up. That one I think was pretty important because it's similar. Or yeah, I'll pull that one up because it shows the Toxic Spikes offense point I was just talking about. So here's Nido and Clef, and Skarmory. So yeah, this team with the Jirachi last is called I Crawled, and maybe I'll do a video or a Smogan post about it. But so yeah, we're gonna go back in time a little more. So this was July 2017, and now we're gonna go back to April 2016, and yeah, so Toph is actually using a Toxic Spikes team I made in the summer of 2015 for August. I don't think he knew it was my team. I don't think he's the type of guy to purposely use my team on me. But yeah, this was another stall team I was having a lot of fun with, and here we see the knockoff on Swampert going a long way, just suddenly instantly crippled. And I think this Toxic Spikes team was really nasty, especially because it had offense or 4-attack Heatran to bust up defensive stuff, but it just goes to show how nasty Clefable was. So it doesn't care about T-Spikes, doesn't care about rocks, doesn't care about sand, and it's just so resilient. And even if Nidoqueen had been on this team to absorb the T-Spikes away from Blissey, then Blissey still would have been annoyed because it gets roared around, Swampert heals, and it definitely could have made life very uncomfortable for a Blissey. So, yeah, this was a random Smogon Tour game, but it just goes to show how... Let me speed this up. Just goes to show how good Clefable was. As Sub-Toxic Zapdos threaten the knockoff. A lot more reliable than Toxic, because you don't have that chance of missing, and it hits other things. It hits steals, removes Jirachi's leftovers, so Wish Call Mine Jirachi, which is still good against Clefable, but definitely gets irritated, and definitely doesn't like Thunder Wave or Encore variants. But that said, that would completely destroy Blissey. So Sub Roost Toxic Zapdos or just Sub Roost Zapdos in general was a major, major pain. And like Leech Protect Shaman, it got phased out. I mean, Nidoqueen becoming popular didn't help, but the fact that it could no longer do anything to Clefable was a huge factor as well. So here I had to sub-call my Flash Cannon Jirachi because it's awesome. But yeah, this was just another example of Clef doing Clef things. So, that was... So we had the breakout tournament of SPL 2015. We had it become, more and more pronounced ever since that period. And then we had the game that Shake had with I Crawled. This one. This one. That you can't see anymore, but this was the battle that really cemented I Crawled and made the team more and more popular, especially when I used it on ladder a couple months later, and it became well known, and it got spammed in tournaments, and really came to define the last couple of years of DPP. So now we can look at the usage stats. This was SPL 8. SPL 8, so 2018. And Clefable is at number 16 in usage, which is pretty impressive considering that it used to be UU. So it's tied with Gengar, and look at some of these OU staples. It beat Blissey by a good chunk, and it's beating a lot of Pokemon that we know to be common and top tier in DPP. So there was that. And then last year, SPL 9, 2019, then Clefable jumped up again, as now it comes in at number 13, ahead of guys like Gyarados, and Breloom, and Metagross. So it really, all that we have seen so far really came forth in full, as I Crawled got spammed a lot, and Clefable stall teams in general just showed how powerful they were. A knockoff, the support stuff was really the most common, as you saw in these last couple of games. That was Clefable's most defining set for a while. And then we go to this past year, SPL 10, and people were starting to say Dugtrio and Clefable are too strong, with Calm Mind Clef really abusing T-Tar and Jirachi, and even stuff like Breloom getting trapped and becoming really hard to overwhelm. So we'll go through a couple Calm Mind Clefable games. So sorry to make this so much about me, but I won't play the false humility card and say I haven't contributed to Clefable's popularity with how much I've spammed it and helped others spam it with the teams I've made. So sorry for the ego, but that's how it has been. So, and I say that again because this is another team I made, Heist, which was meant to be an extreme of the idea of Dugtrio, Calm Mind Clef, and this game was a perfect example of it because it was just meant to get in the T-Tar and wear it down and trap that and Jirachi. And then Clefable is so good with T-Tar down that even against offensive teams the kinds of offensive teams that you're going to see here, then as the Dugtrio does absolutely nothing. But this team had 3 strong revenge killers because Latias goes down early in order to bait in and weaken Jirachi. So even with the Jirachi around, I mean, it's still going to take hits, but it's going to come back. And as you'll see, then Clefable's going to Calm Mind up and basically take the entire game. And that's how nasty it is. It's just, I mean, Dugtrio didn't even do anything here, so we're really seeing the full effect of how even recently Clef is such a big deal. And he goes for Healing Wish here because either he didn't have Trick, which is understandable because it's a Scarf Latias and you want more coverage options, or because he was afraid of just getting Rotom and then not being able to do anything to the Clef. And here we see Bold Clef in action as even Ironhead Jirachi gets shrugged off, doing as little as 19% sometimes. And just getting stalled out. So the Jirachi comes back to full health, but it doesn't matter because even its 24 Iron Heads are not going to be enough, or a little less than 24 because it had used 2 on T-Tar earlier. But yeah, Para doesn't do anything. And Gyarados' Waterfall does absolutely nothing. So that was one game. Here's another game. XCal made an incredible team that I really love, which is a similar... It's not as extreme as the one I made, but it shows the full force of Clef and Doug together. So he's Calm Minding, he's chipping T-Tar. Even the Banded Pursuit, not going to be enough. And you don't want to switch Dugtrio directly into T-Tar, so it's not easy to pull off. But that's where the hazards come in. And dealing with hazards can be tough. That's why it's important to be very aware of how to deal with them. It's not as simple as throwing on hazard removal. Then again, I don't think that tends to work very well in any generation. Like in advance, if your plan of dealing with Spikes and Spikes teams is just to spin with Claydol or Starmie, you're in for a rough ride. Similar idea in the Defog generations. But yeah, so this was another really powerful example of Clef being great. And if you just go back to... this video is long enough as is, so I don't want to include every single replay, but you can go back to the logs and replays threads of every major tournament for the last several years, and Clefable has prominent, major, important appearances in all of them. Mostly the the Nox set, but yeah, so... yeah, this was another great team. As see, even just that little double switch where Clefable comes in on a switch and you get health with it for doing that. Blissey could not do that. Blissey would lose health because of Rocks and Sand, but with Clef you just heal back up. Magic Guard is that big a deal. So, as we see, T-Tar Pursuit of Pursuit Lock Dugtrio. But yeah, that's the idea. Clefable was not exactly the winning Pokemon here, but this was another example of how effective the style is. And Jirachi is important in that whole thing too. But yeah, so now you're getting an idea of the metagame. And finally, Heist, the main contributor to the Clef trend. He was really the pioneer of the whole idea of spamming it in more than just the occasional game. I mean, I give credit to the Oceania trio of Earthworm, Pana, and Heist, but Heist was the most prominent Clef figure. He was spamming it consistently. Although, of course, we give props to Tama for the very early use of Not Clefable that had not been seen before. And then Heist took that and just ran with it. And then I took that and ran with it. And... then everyone else contributed, but that was the early phase. Anyway, so this is also from this past season of SPL, and it's also showing Clef and... or how good Calm Mind Clef is, really, even against a team that looks well-equipped against it. It's got incredible synergy against not only Clef, but even anti-Clef scenarios. Like Breloom, if Breloom gets Dugtrio'd, then T-Tar pursues Dugtrio and can stay alive for Clef. But even then... just as he gets an Ice Beam crit there that I skipped over. I mean, that helped, but just goes to show just what Breloom, or what Clefable can do, even without revealing the Dugtrio. I don't even remember if Dugtrio is there, but that's just the example of, in the current day, that people were saying, you know, Clef has to go, or Dugtrio has to go because it makes Clef too good, stuff like that. So... yeah, I think that summarizes Clef's history, and you can see it in the fact that in this past season of SPL, Clefable was number 6 in usage, which is astonishing, and its win rate... Now, granted, I personally don't buy win rate as a gospel of statistics. So many factors play into that. Hacks, if you had the game won but through, things like that. You know, and it can't all be attributed to one specific Pokemon. However, it is still a notable statistic because it is very high. So Clefable was really the way to go and is the way to go. But then again, look at Magnazone performing similar feats. And Breloom. So it's not all that. Look at Flygon with that win rate. Look at Empoleon's win rate. So you see what I mean. But Clefable being so highly used now is just a testament to how far it's come. I mean, look at all these Pokemon that it beat out. These DPP staples. Dugtra's win rate was also, of course, correlated with Clef, given how often they were used together, and you can click on the moves and teammates Pokepaste here if you want to get into that more. Like, let's Control F Clefable and see what we get. So yeah, Clefable, we see its moves here, its teammates, and yeah, you can look into that yourself. Again, all links in the description. But yeah, that should do it. So that explains why Clef is used in DPP. Again, Blissey is not completely outclassed, and it is still a very good Pokemon. But there's a reason why Clefable is preferred, and Magic Guard and the power of passive damage is just that big. And this isn't even a DPP specific thing either. I would even go so far as to say that every gen more and more leans toward being more resilient to hazards than the opponent. Actually, that's not even a new idea. Back in Advanced, then one of the best, most popular teams, Superman, was dedicated to being more resilient to spikes and sand than the opponent. So it's just that idea come to light here. But if you look into the later gens, then the popularity of things like Poison Heal, Gliscor speaks to that. And of course, Clefable itself. Which brings me to my last point. I do not think Clefable came into popularity in DPP as a result of its dominance in the 6th generation. That's just a happy coincidence. But it was more the Magic Guard response to entry hazards. And it had already been seen before Gen 6 even came out. So just more and more people looking for ways to deal with the current metagame and finding that. And of course, Knockoff, which was never seen on more than a few Clefable throughout the entirety of Gen 6. So it was really a DPP thing. And so I don't know if that Knockoff thing also came from Gen 6. I like to think it's a happy coincidence, but it really doesn't matter. Clefable has really come to define a big aspect of DPP, which goes to show that metagames don't stop developing in huge ways just because they stop being the main generation. So yeah, I think we can call it there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed and learned something, and let me know if you have any questions. I will happily answer them all, and I will catch you next time.